and get started. Thank you guys for being patient, and good evening. Welcome back to Tea Time with an Epilepsy Specialist. We are so excited to have you join us tonight. Before we get to the question and answer part that I know everyone is eager for, I will share some announcements with you first. So I'd like to remind everyone that tonight's session is being recorded and will be reposted on our social media platforms. You guys all should have seen when you logged in the announcement that tonight's session will be recorded. So I just wanted to give you that reminder. I'd like to also ask everyone that you please keep yourself muted, especially when we get to the question and answer session. You will see that there is a feature that you can use called the raise your hand feature. You should be able to find that. I'll show you. If you click on participants, you'll be able to see your name. And then there's a little button to the right-hand side that says more. This is also dependent on whether you're using your cell phone for tonight's session or if you are using a computer or laptop. If you're using your phone, you might find this at the bottom. There's a more button that has 3 little dots. And so again, if you have any trouble with that, no worries at all. You can always put your question in the chat box, and I will be monitoring that tonight along with my co-host Jessie, who is also on with us. And last but certainly not least, we are so excited to let everyone know that tonight's session is being sponsored by SK Life Science. We are so grateful for the partnership and sponsorship and the ability to work with you all. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you Valerie Atoy from SK Life Science.
Hi, everyone. It's a complete honor to be able to sponsor tonight's tea time. I'm an account manager with SK Life Science in Jacksonville, Florida. Also on tonight's call is my coworker, Christy Jimenez from Tampa, Florida. A little bit about SK Life Science is that we are a CNS-focused pharmaceutical company driven by the needs of healthcare providers, patients, caregivers, and the CNS community. Nothing else. In May, SK Life Science brought to market Xcopri for adults with partial onset seizures. Should you have any questions, always ask your healthcare provider, or our website is www.xcopri.com. And tonight you're going to get the opportunity to ask questions from 3 epilepsy specialists. And on the call tonight is Dr. Kitani, who practices out of Tampa, Florida. She is board certified in both neurology and epilepsy by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. From Jacksonville, Florida is Dr. Anthony Ritaccio. He is a professor of neurology and neurosurgery and a senior associate consultant in the Department of Neurology at the Mayo Clinic, where his principal role is senior epileptologist at the Mayo Comprehensive Epilepsy Department. And also on tonight's call is Dr. Grewal. He's the director of epilepsy surgery, the director of hydrocephalus, cerebral spinal fluid dynamics, the director of stereotactic and functional neurosurgery, as well as the director of medical education at the Mayo Clinic. So thank you so much for having us on tonight as your sponsor. And I look forward to hearing all your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Valerie. And now we will hand it over to Dr. Kitani.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again for coming. I look forward to these monthly meetings. And we are grateful today to have Dr. Ritaccio and to have Dr. Sanjeet. And we are very thankful for SK Life for sponsoring our event and looking after our patients with the new medication that they offered. I'm gonna let Dr. Ritaccio say a word and maybe Dr. Grewal after him. You have to unmute yourself.
Great, can everyone see our slides?
Yes.
Excellent. We'll have Dr. Ritaccio start, and I just want to say thank you again for having us today.
Welcome, thank you.
I had to unmute, I apologize. Am I audible to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, you know, I think Dr. Grewal and I are we're given approximately 15 minutes or so to orient you to MAYO and our mission to fight all the epilepsies. And our way is not the only way to do it, and but it's certainly a unique and I think very competent way to do it. And I'm certainly grateful for this opportunity to speak to all of you. I look forward to at least helping to answer some of your questions later. I think Dr. Grewal is playing a little video here of Jacksonville, Florida. The Mayo Clinic is just several miles west of the most northern beaches of Florida. And we have an extensive campus and a very, very, very comprehensive program in both neurology and neurosurgery. And this is our Mingurian building. This is our the building where the neurologists and neurosurgeons and brain tumor specialists all meet and congregate. I think it's a very pleasant and hopefully very comprehensive experience when we see patients for the first time and spend anywhere between 60 to 90 minutes with them, plowing through all their old records and trying to forge important relationships, sometimes for a lifetime. Sanjeet, can we? Thanks. So one of the things I will emphasize over these next 5 minutes or so is that we all have opinions, and my opinion is that competency is the greatest kindness. We're very happy that whenever these rankings come around, which they did several weeks ago, these rankings from the U.S. News and World Report found our hospital to be the #1 hospital in Florida. And I think more relevantly to the journey of an epilepsy patient, that out of over 1,200 programs in neurology and neurosurgery, we were in the top 25, which is, I think, is a commendation to the extremely hard work of all of the faculty that help treat and cure epilepsy at the Mayo Clinic, Florida. When I thought about this talk, I thought about lessons I've learned over the last 30 odd years of treating patients with epilepsy. And basically, this is my life. Number one, epilepsy is complex. There are certainly a number of people who will be easily managed with a simple medicine, or maybe the first or second medicine they choose, but epilepsy is very complicated. And epilepsy always has a cause, and everyone should always be seeking to do two things simultaneously: reducing or eliminating seizures, but understanding the cause and understanding whether the cause is something that can be addressed directly in an attempt to cure them. Epilepsy is very, very commonly a troubling and difficult disease to help. There are maybe 3.5 million Americans with epilepsy, and perhaps a little over 1 million of them, or 1 out of 3 or so. Conventional therapies won't work. The only advice I give my epilepsy patients, whether they remain with me or seek help in other places, is don't get stuck. Don't get stuck with the same therapy that lacks efficacy. We spend a lot of time thinking about epilepsy surgery because, to be honest with you, epilepsy surgery doesn't apply to all people or all our patients, but when it does, it has the capacity to cure people. And by cure, we always mean the same thing: no seizures, no drugs. Here are the keys to your convertible. Now drive home. We believe now neurologists in the community have a very narrow window to treat epilepsy. We believe that after 2 years of treatment and maybe trying the first drug or the second drug, that you're either where you want to be or you're not where you want to be. So 2 years and 2 drugs later, we believe you don't have to do anything, but you should be talking to a lot of people and a lot of people who treat epilepsy in high volume and see if they have any better ideas. So I think these are very basic and hopefully not controversial statements. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is not the group of people that treats epilepsy. This is the core group of people that treat epilepsy on a daily basis. You'll see that there's 4 epileptologists. The 3 senior epileptologists, including myself, have over, sadly, because even though I have a baby face, the 3 of us have over 100 years experience treating epilepsy. There are 3 surgeons that address themselves to epilepsies. Dr. Grewal is certainly our chief epilepsy neurosurgeon, but Dr. Chichana and the department chairman, Dr. Quinones Hinojosa, are main agents in operating on and treating complex seizures that are associated with brain tumors. We have several neuroimmunologists that, if our patients have epilepsy on an autoimmune basis, will help us establish and create infusion therapies that are often curative. Epilepsy is a complex, multifaceted disease. We have neurogeneticists to help us understand risks to offspring in people that are planning to reproduce who have epilepsy. We have extremely competent radiologists that often find abnormalities in MRIs that were reported to be normal in the outside. We have neuropsychologists that help us understand the risks to important cognitive functions like memory associated with many of our epilepsies. And believe it or not, every one of these people discuss and touches our epilepsy patients after the initial visit. Every Monday, we all meet and we all discuss our most difficult cases, especially if they're drug resistant, to try to determine a best therapy or potential cure. So this is a very tight-knit group, a kind of a multidisciplinary group of, I believe, some of the world's greatest experts in their that have been curated together to commit to this. And this is all we do, and including evenings and weekends. Next slide. This is just a reflection of how seriously we take our commitment. Our main commitment is the patients sitting in front of us in our consultant room and talking to us. But when we're not in the consultant room at night or on weekends, this is the estimated accomplishments of the group of the epilepsy faculty just in the last 12 months. And that includes 100 epilepsy publications, 25 book chapters. Many of my colleagues have been leaders and presidents of national societies. Last year, we published 3 textbooks. We're constantly giving continuing medical education courses to the neurologists that help you and treat you in your community to keep them up to date. And one of my dear and senior colleagues, Bill Tatum, is the editor of a very prestigious epilepsy journal, the journal Epilepsy and Behavior. So, we live and breathe this, and we take this mission very, very, very seriously. Next slide. When you come to the Mayo Clinic, you rapidly understand the concept of the enterprise. There are 3 epileptology sections, if you will, one in Jacksonville, one in Rochester, Minnesota, and one in Arizona. And this is just a group picture from a recent meeting. We meet regularly. When we have complex surgical cases, we have virtual visits like the one we're having today, and you get the combined wisdom of the entire epilepsy faculty across all 3 Mayo systems. Next slide. Finally, I thought to just quickly summarize before I turn over to Dr. Grewal for his comments and philosophies. I thought in the last several years to make a list of why people come to see me. And this is the list. Some people have been given a diagnosis of epilepsy and they just want to know if the diagnosis is correct. Some people have been given a diagnosis of epilepsy and they've been given a certain therapy and they want to know if I endorse that particular therapy or I would recommend another one. Some people want to know if they're a candidate for epilepsy surgery and want to engage in a comprehensive workup to determine the benefit-risk ratio of a surgery that could potentially cure them. Some people are coming in and ultimately undergoing complex assessments for various implantable devices, both peripherally and in the brain, that we have now, both common and FDA approved, as well as experimental, that help to reduce or eliminate seizures. Some patients are coming to see me after failing conventional medicines to enroll in studies of new and promising medicines that are in trial. Some people come in and we're part of a comprehensive team with brain tumor specialists and radiation oncologists to help manage seizures related to brain tumors, and be in the OR to do brain mapping and to help in a comprehensive way so that we don't only remove the brain tumor, we remove the epilepsy. Some patients, mainly from, let's say, the Jacksonville area and environs, but certainly I have some people from Tampa and from where I live in Sarasota, believe it or not, who actually come to me for regular care, and I'm certainly happy to be managing their case over their lifespan, as long as it's useful and productive. And then my final comment is, we're not typically here to be, or replace, or to be an alternative, or certainly to criticize your neurologists that are treating you. The MAYO has a unique model. It's had that model for many, many, many decades. It's a destination hospital. The best model for us is when there's the patient, there's the epileptologist at the MAYO and the epileptology team, and the local neurologist who's continuing to monitor and care for the patient locally while we're reviewing them for advanced therapies. And it's that triad that I think works the best. Dr. Grewal, would you like to, before I say that, I mean, if you go to the MAYO website and just make any kind of inquiry into epilepsy or epilepsy care, you'll be led to a screen that looks like this, and this is just a way to enroll to get some further information about our services. Dr. Grewal, please.
Thanks, Dr. Ritaccio. And we're going to move on. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our role as a comprehensive epilepsy treatment center and focus a little bit on what we do from a surgical standpoint as well. So as Dr. Ritaccio described earlier, and as many of you who treat epilepsy or patients who are dealing with epilepsy know very well, this is a very common disorder, and often it doesn't get a lot of the credit when we talk about neurologic disorders that others do, but it's quite disabling to patients who are suffering with it. 3.5 million people in the US are suffering with epilepsy right now. And when Dr. Ritaccio was talking about 2 years, 2 drugs, it's coming from this data here. So when you have a first drug, you have about a 50% chance of getting seizure free. When we add in a second drug, another 13% of patients become seizure free. Once we get beyond that, we have kind of, reducing returns. Just 1% of patients get benefit from adding a third drug. And if we try to combine 2 drugs together, maybe we get another 3% of patients. So when we look at drug-resistant epilepsy and exactly what that is, that means that if you failed 2 trials of the appropriately chosen anti-seizure drugs, we're considering you to be drug-resistant, because based on the previous data, your likelihood of becoming seizure-free with another drug is very low. So what are your options when that happens? So one way to think about this is you get diagnosed with epilepsy, you try the appropriate seizure medication. If you're not seizure-free, you try a second seizure medication. And you can do that as a combination or as a separate drug altogether. If you see beyond that someone's still having seizures, they need to have an evaluation with neuroimaging, what we call MRIs or PET scans, to see if we can identify where the epilepsy is coming from. And if that's the case, then we can try to resect that area or modulate that area to try to cure the epilepsy. If we don't see anything on the MRI, then the question is, do we try one of the new therapeutic medications, or do we try a different form of combination therapy? Oftentimes, by the time people see Dr. Ritaccio or my partners, they've been through 7, 8 different seizure drugs and been on 3 different drugs at the same time. So this should take about 2 to 3 years to have this determination. But the average delay to surgery that we notice is greater than 20 years. And when we're talking about 100,000 patients that could benefit from this, about 10% actually get referred for surgery annually. And why is that an issue? Because we know that the longer you're dealing with epilepsy, the more damage it's doing, the more you're suffering. We know it becomes harder and harder to treat. And this basically breaks it down. So if 3 million people in the US have epilepsy, 35% are drug resistant, or approximately 1 million people, of which 300,000 would be candidates for cure with resection, but only 7,000 surgeries are performed in the country every year. So as surgeons and as epilepsy centers, we have to think, well, why is this the case? Why are people not having the surgeries that could cure them? And it's because surgery is scary. It's brain surgery, right? And historically, people worry about the safety, undergoing a brain surgery, what's going to happen, am I going to lose my cognition? And we have to think of better ways to treat people and safer ways to treat people. And that's what we've really strived to do over the last 40 to 50 years. So, for example, a very common type of epilepsy that does very well with surgical resection is what we call temporal lobe epilepsy. And traditionally, what we used to do, this was in the 50s and 60s, it was an anterior temporal lobectomy. It was an open surgery, it was a resection, and it had a lot of side effects which worried people. So we moved to more selective surgeries. But what you can see now is, many patients, all they get is just a little pinhole incision, and in the MRI suite, they get this area ablated and become seizure-free with results as good as the open procedure. We have non-invasive procedures such as radiosurgery, and then other procedures such as when we're evaluating you with intracranial electrodes, we can actually sometimes do ablations at the same time. So you don't need to have multiple surgeries to treat your epilepsy. But then what about beyond that? Everything, the way we've thought about surgery and taking care of patients has been about, okay, there's something that's wrong. There's some part of the brain that's sending electrical signals in a way it shouldn't be, so let's take it out. More and more now we're thinking, well, maybe we don't need to take this part of the brain out. Maybe we can modify how this brain's responding to the electrical activity. And that's where neuromodulation comes into place. And these are all different ways we can do this depending on what type of epilepsy you have, but they're less invasive. They have less risk because they're not resective. Deep brain stimulation is something that was recently approved for epilepsy in 2018. Mayo Clinic in Florida is the #1 center in the Southeast for doing deep brain stimulation for epilepsy. Responsive neurostimulation has been around for approximately 16, 17 years. We were part of the initial trials for this, and we continue to use this in the appropriate patients, specifically patients where their epilepsy is coming from an area of the brain that we know if we resect, we would cause damage. So an area that controls your speech or your motor, what we can do is we can stimulate that area and help you with your epilepsy. And this last thing, what we call CSCS, is it's a novel technique that's experimental, that's only available at Mayo right now. And it's another way to stimulate and modify tissue that we found is, if not as good, but better than responsive neurostimulation in our initial trials. So that's kind of our introduction to the things we can offer and how we think about patients who are refractory to epilepsy. And if there are any questions, we'd like to open it up to that now.
Okay, so our first question is from Jillian. Jillian, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, with the RNS on the brain, can you travel? Is it safe to travel on a plane?
Absolutely.
Okay, so nothing will go off, like nothing will trigger it if you're on the plane or going through a metal detector?
So it will trigger through certain metal detectors, and you get a little card just like you would have if you had a pacemaker, where you let them know that you have an implanted device, and everyone at the airport and metal detectors are well aware of it.
Yeah, I guess my comment for that would be, come on, this is Florida. Everybody has a pacemaker in an airport, right? I mean, so they're used to that. So yeah, it's good to let them know so that, it's not a surprise, but it's perfectly safe. But yeah, I mean, heart pacemakers obviously are, and they're certainly aware that pacemaker technologies have gone beyond cardiology. So there really is no issue at all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jillian, for your question. Does someone else have a question? Okay, so while you guys are thinking of your questions, I have one that was sent in that I can ask. So that question is, if my seizures are only nocturnal and I'm still having them, but again, only while I'm asleep, is it okay for me to drive?
I'm gonna let Dr. Ritaccio answer that question because he gave a whole talk in one of my symposium, and everybody kind of have an opinion about that. But since I respect his seniority and his expertise and his experience and his long presentation that I remember very well, I'm gonna let him talk about that.
Oh, now I remember you. Diplomatic. Yeah, I mean, it's an extremely important question, and it's a little more complex to answer than you would think. Let me give you the ways I'm dissecting it, and give you my best answers. First of all, seizures don't respect the day-night or the light-dark cycle. But it is true that there are some seizures or seizure types, or the way seizures express themselves in some people, that it's more easier for them to come out during the electrical behavior of sleep than during the daytime. And so we always have patients that tell us that either their seizures occur on a mattress during sleep or during a nap, for that matter, not just at night, or the majority of their seizures do so. And there's a couple of things to say about that. First of all, this has been studied for about 50 years. And so one answer is it depends on how long you've had seizures. For example, if somebody was given this diagnosis 1.5 years ago and they've had 4 or 5 seizures and they've been exclusively nocturnal, there's at least a 50 to 75% chance they'll eventually have a daytime seizure as their syndrome marches along over year 3, year 5, year 10. They just haven't lived long enough with their syndrome for their seizures to start popping up whenever their seizures want to start popping up. So there is a well-established fact that people that have exclusively nighttime seizures, if they wait long enough, they'll also have daytime seizures. There will be people, they will be a relatively few. So this is certainly an infrequent group who will have seizures exclusively at night. And the decision to whether they can drive or not, or whether it's safe, or whether they represent a safety risk to the citizens of their state, is not really a question for me, unfortunately and sadly. It's a question for the State Department of Motor Vehicles, because I don't determine, and none of the doctors present at this Zoom meeting determine who drives or not. The state determines who drives, and the state has regulations, and every state has different regulations. In New York, where I was the medical reviewer for the Department of Motor Vehicles for loss of consciousness for about 25 years, I helped craft a regulation that says that if you've had seizures for 2 years, meaning 24 months, and none of them occurred while awake, you were allowed to drive. In other states, depending on how you feel about the enlightenment of various states, they just have a strict rule. Meaning in the state of Florida, if your last seizure was less than 6 months ago, there's this prohibition, and this variation of sleeping and waking is problematic in this state. It doesn't really matter about safety, it matters about your state DMV. Doctor, do you want to comment on that?
I think I agree with you with everything you said, but I have seen horrible cases, maybe that's my luck, that I've seen patients who just decided not to continue their medication because they were about to get to surgery or decrease their medication, and just before, right there, and they have been seizure free for a year, they had a seizure and they got into some major car accidents. So honestly, when I have patients who have been having seizures at night during nocturnal or during the day, or it doesn't matter, they had a seizure, I prefer them not to drive. The 6 months, I believe, like most of the state had determined some of them is 1 year, some of them is less than that. Some of them physician have to inform the DMV. Some of them is at the discretion of the patient, where you just, as a physician, document in your chart. Like Florida, you just document in the chart. In New York, you just documented the chart. By New Jersey, as a physician, you're obligated to report to the DMV. Now, some seizures, like Dr. Ritaccio said, they may happen only at night, and they would happen in the future also during the day. But some seizures, we don't think they are seizures because they are not the dramatic ones. They could be just a quick alteration of consciousness, or they just think they were tired. But these are small, probably what we're gonna call in just basic words, small seizures, but they are seizures. So unfortunately, if you have an alteration of consciousness, even for 5 seconds while you're driving in a highway, you are at risk of getting into a car accident or killing somebody innocent. So if you have a seizure, and studies have done to show that after 6 months, a year, your likelihood, if you have been controlled, is lower. That's why they allow you to drive again. But if you had had a seizure, I think a minimum time to respect is the 6 month, because of the statistic that shows that your likelihood of being controlled on medication, if you continue to be compliant, sleep well, don't drink, and respect all the rules, is lower than if you were not taking your medication and other so forth. So basically, if you have seizures at night, I will be very careful not to drive and respect the 6 months for your safety and safety of others who are driving by you.
Great. Well, I think we're saying the same thing.
Yes.
State of Florida regulation, 6 months. And look, if you have seizures and they occur at night, and your doctor makes the right decisions for you therapeutically, and you stop having seizures, well, then you drive legally. People that continue to have seizures over years and decades, all of them who have exclusively nighttime seizures, eventually they will have daytime seizures too. It's just a matter of time if they're not doing well. Okay, so there is no absolute safety about having seizures on a mattress.
Well, thank you. And Tina, you had a question also related to the sleep and epilepsy. Would you like to ask? You can unmute yourself.
I was just gonna say I can kind of relate the driving and seizures due to the fact that I actually have been in that situation. The reason I was going to say this is because I've actually had my license taken away due to the driving and epilepsy. I've actually been in 3 car accidents due to my seizures. So I honestly feel that if you have to, if you don't need your license, please don't get it back. I've actually slammed into a light pole and almost died. So I honestly don't want my license back. So I honestly, if you don't need your license and you can get around different ways, please just do it that way.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you said that. And coming from a person, an individual who suffer from the condition is a lot better than coming from a physician or DMV or other people, because you have experienced it. So you're given a very powerful message, and I'm thankful for that. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to give it to everybody personally, and I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Tina. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And you know, there's many ways to look at that. So, you know, I really like to, you know, put a significantly positive spin on this. You know, what we all work for, and certainly what we work for in our epilepsy center, is a happy ending, a seizure-free ending, if and when possible. And it's no surprise, because we understand what's important to people. You know, this is a quality of life illness, right? This is not an illness that necessarily, certainly not in the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people with epilepsy have normal lifespans, but we're talking about quality. So it's no surprise whenever we're fortunate enough to broker cures, either medically or surgically, the first thing I get is a picture of a patient driving their car or their new new convertible. That's just sort of how they celebrate and that's how they let me know I did my job.
I have 2 children, so I want people who have kids and have family to be able to have their mother or their children of their own to still be alive. So I try to reach out to other people that have kids to still have a life, and as much as I can spread it, I do. I even actually get on epilepsy websites and tell people to not drive and to not, do other things. So I reach out to people as much as I can and tell them. So please, you guys, if you don't need your license, please don't get it. Please.
Ina, again, I appreciate and thank you so much, because this is a very powerful message, and this is our mission for organizing a tea time. It's for everyone to share, and the most powerful message, again, it's when it comes from you who experience the problem. And as Dr. Ritaccio said, yes, it affects your quality of life, but there are a lot of things in life that affect our quality of life, and everyone has a difficult in a certain different other ways. And if we manage to modify our life, we change the circumstances, it can be devastating. So if you cannot drive, or if you drive and risk are really high, then the purpose of driving, and you can arrange for driving, even if it's not fun to be dependent, it's a lot better than putting yourself in a situation where you lose your life or you kill an innocent person. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Mary. She says, what is deep brain stimulation? And since it's fairly new, what is the success rate?
That's a Dr. Grewal question if I've ever heard one. Dr. Grewal.
Thanks, Dr. Ritaccio, for that. So deep brain stimulation, it's actually something that's been around since the 1990s. It was originally used for things such as Parkinson's disease and tremors to help control that. It's been used for epilepsy actually since approximately 2008, 2010. That's when the trials were done. And it got approved in Europe to be used since then. We just recently got approval in the United States in 2018. So it is a therapy that's been around for quite a bit. Now, when we talk about deep brain stimulation, it's more of a general therapy for patients who have seizures coming from either a large part of their brain or from multiple different parts of their brain. So it's patients that typically would not be candidates for resective surgery. And in those patients, what we say is it's similar to vagal nerve stimulation, but can sometimes work in conjunction with vagal nerve stimulation. So it's about a 50 to 60% reduction in your seizure frequency. So it's for patients who have really disabling seizures that are happening quite often. When we look at it, it's people who are having at least 6 seizures a month, each month, before we would consider doing something like deep brain stimulation for them. If anyone else wants to comment on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I mean, it's a type of therapy that we do employ, and Dr. Grewal is our master at implanting these devices. They're virtually exactly like the devices that get implanted for Parkinson's disease. We actually stimulate the same part of the brain that is stimulated to relieve tremors in Parkinson's disease. There's this small little area of the brain called the thalamus, and essentially it's sort of like the traffic cop for the brain. You know, it tells certain parts of the brain to go, it tells certain parts of the brain to stop. And so when we put these electrodes in the brain and stimulate it and upregulate it, it helps essentially put the brakes on seizures. And we typically get significant seizure reductions. It's not a method for cure, as Dr. Grewal said, and I will importantly emphasize, but when people are having a 60 or 70% seizure reduction and their seizures are shorter and their seizure recovery times are quicker, I mean, the whole point here is to cure people. And if we can't get them a home run, we can get them to second base. And when they're on second base, we're trying to get them to third base. We're always trying to improve the nature, frequency, duration, and intensity of seizures. And a deep brain stimulator is one of the most important new tools to do that.
Great, thank you. And now we have a question from Todd Kaiser. Todd, you can unmute yourself.
Dad, we don't hear you.
Yes, I heard about this new Delanton lawsuit. What's the story about that?
Sorry, we didn't hear the first part, Todd.
I heard that there's a lawsuit against Delanton that affects that people are suing because of bad effects it has on the brain. It's all over Facebook.
I have no awareness. I mean, if I had more details, I might be able to help a little bit, but I don't know of any class action lawsuit against any anticonvulsant right now. I'm sorry.
But I can tell you, go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry. And thank you. And also, how many types of seizures are there?
Well,
You know? Go ahead, doctor.
No,
because I was about to say, I've been doing
this
this for 30 years. I never bothered to count, you know?
There is many. That's what I was gonna say. There is a lot of them. So there is different type of seizures. There are one that are focal seizures, which means they originate for a specific part of the brain, and some of them are generalized. The whole brain start acting up fast right away. All of the brain get crazy. So that's why there are different medication, and it's important also when we monitor our patient, when we do that test, the EEG that you probably know about, what we try to do is find out where the seizures are from. We don't always answer that question, so we do other extra testing to answer that. So now, even in those type of seizures, the focal one, there is different types, subtypes, and then the ones that are generalized, there's subtypes. And there's other ones that are kind of unclassified, and there are syndromes that are different in children. And also to answer your question about the class action for Dilantin, there will always be lawsuits against medication because people are trying to get rich suddenly out of hard work from other people, and that's not right. But Dilantin was one of the very old medications that was really helping with seizures, and it still really help with seizure, and we still use it when patients are in the hospital and have these prolonged seizures that we call status epilepticus, and it's still in the protocol. And it does help. To be on it for long term, yes, it's not a good idea because it has a lot of side effects. And why being on it chronically, since we have tons of other new medication that have a safer side effect profile and well tolerated, and it could provide the same efficacy if it's not higher. So that's why we don't keep patients in long period of time on that medication, and that's what Dr. Ritaccio was talking about, his institution. And when you're an epileptologist, you're very proud because you want your physician, your patients, to be seen by an epileptologist to get you in the right medication you're on, because the longer you wait and the longer you are not treated properly, the worse your seizure is gonna get and the harder to be treated it's gonna be. So now, when you hear these stories about seizure medication, it is very important to discuss with your physician and to keep in mind there is no medication that doesn't have side effects. Even vitamins, if you abuse them, you will have problems. So I just wanted to touch base on that.
Yeah, that question just opens up all sorts of possibilities. So I really thank you for that question. Let me take a crack at it. My best answer is there are dozens and dozens of different types of seizures. So that's one box, the dozens and dozens of different types of seizures. Then another box is the dozens and dozens of causes, you know, because every time I see a patient, there's two issues, right? What kind of seizures do you have and what works best for them? And then there's the second box. Why do I have seizures? I always tell my patients respectfully, seizures are not a gift from God. If no one's told you why you have seizures, you deserve an exploration as to why you have them in the first place. There's always a reason. The reason may be a congenital or birth defect. The reason may be something that you inherited from your mother's side of the family. The reason may be related to an injury. The reason may be the scar from an infection. So there's two boxes. There's the dozens and dozens and dozens of common reasons why that create epilepsy. And then there's the dozens and dozens and dozens of seizure types. You know, when a witness is looking at a seizure, there's many different kinds of seizures. There's 25 drugs. Like I said in my second slide, you know, that's why, you know, we exist. Yeah, I see a lot of people, you know, they have 1 or 2 seizures, they get put on Keppra, and they're doing well. Well, good for them. Then I see some people, they have a couple of seizures, they get put on Dilantin, and they're not doing so well. And you know, I think the point is, this is a complex disease, and if everyone became seizure-free on the first drug they tried because your doctor made the right diagnosis, gave you the right drug, and it made you seizure-free, you know, I'd be a barista at Starbucks, okay? Because even when your neurologist, and I'm in this boat too, even when I make the right decision, even when I know what the patient has, and even if I know why they have it, and even when I put them on the right medicine, 4 out of 10 people, it doesn't work. They need to move on. Okay, so I use your question as a platform to, you know, I guess be a bit of a preacher, but I apologize.
Thank you, Todd, for your question. And we have another question that was sent in through the chat, and they're wanting to know what product SK Life Science is offering for patients with epilepsy.
Who gets that one?
Not it.
Maybe
Well,
Valerie,
I mean, okay, so are we, does someone want to talk specifically about one particular drug or Xcopri specifically? Is that what is that where we're headed? Just
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
All right, okay. I mean, you know, I don't want to, I mean, my general preference is certainly not to single out any drug. Like, as I said earlier, and I mean this very sincerely, there is no right drug. Because if there was a right drug, I would not be the only person to know that secret. And again, I'd be working at Starbucks because everyone would be seizure-free and be on the right drug. We're always getting new drugs, and we're always hoping that new drugs will be better than old drugs, and sometimes they are. And sometimes they're typically not any worse, but sometimes they're just not any better than the old drugs. It usually takes a long time. And you know, in other words, we only know the truth about drugs when they're FDA released, when they're in a pharmacy, when millions of people across the world and across several continents have been exposed to them. Then we can understand how it really shakes out and how many people really have meaningful seizure reductions or seizure freedom. The specific drug you referred to is probably the newest one out of the starting gate, you know, released, I think, sometime in late 2019 or early 2020. And prior to release, you know, prior to the FDA looking at it, you know, it looks like a very promising drug with a significant frequency of rendering very difficult patients seizure-free. We're very hopeful about that drug. We're using it, you know, very, very aggressively at the Mayo Clinic. And we're hoping that in larger scale use, over millions, it has the same ability to make difficult patients seizure-free as it did when it was in trial. So we're very, very optimistic. I don't know that I can say anything more than that, you know, and be appropriate.
Thank you. And we have another question from Jillian. You've been waiting patiently.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is going back to the RNS. I already had surgery, a craniotomy done, and it really didn't work for my seizures. So does that make me a candidate for the RNS, or not? Because my meds are not really working either.
Dr. Grewal, could you address the feasibility of a responsive neurostimulator and implantation in someone with a prior craniotomy?
I'm sorry?
Dr. Ritaccio was asking me to address kind of your situation in particular in patients who've had a surgery and it hasn't worked.
Okay.
So the feasibility, the ability to do it is not a problem. We can do that all the time, but there's the question of feasibility, and then there's the question of efficacy and seeing, is it going to help you? And that really comes down to understanding where your seizures are coming from.
Okay.
So So the first part is, working with, for example, at MAYO, you'd be working with Dr. Ritaccio and the team into accurately defining exactly where your seizures are coming from. Once we know that, then absolutely RNS is an option, additional resection is an option, laser ablation is an option. All those are options, but none of them help if we're not on the right spot.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Generally, if somebody's had a previous surgery, and if there's a general question, could they have a modulatory procedure like an RNS or a DBS? The answer is absolutely. It's technically feasible, and Dr. Grewal is, in my opinion, and in reality, an artist. So I'm just saying this for reiteration. To have an implanted device like an RNS, which is what we call a closed loop device. It actually has a computer. It's reading your EEG all the time. It senses within the first tenth of 1 second that you're about to have a seizure, and then it electrically interferes with it. The ability for an RNS to block your seizures depends on, are the stimulating electrodes of the device sitting right in the deep middle of where your seizures come from. So yes, you can have an RNS if you've had prior surgery. Will it work or not? It depends on, do we put those probes in the right place? And that takes a lot of work to determine.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
And then also for the RNS, one more point, it helps monitor patients sometimes when you have the device on. It keeps collecting data. So sometimes there are some seizures that are missed that we don't know about, or it gives you more information, because remember, when we do a regular EEG, you put it in the scalp, so that you have a lot of recording that could be missed. But when you have these electrodes deep inside your brain, it's recording straight from the brain. So sometimes the device, it does help as a neuromodulator, and also it helps with getting information and having a better idea of what's going on in those areas that have been studied before they put the implants, and that what we think is really the seizures that originating from. And they could decide if one of those areas is more hyperactive than the other ones, and maybe they could offer other options in the future. So it does help as a neuromodulator, and it helps as recording constant data. And now with all their new software, the analysis makes it a lot easier for the patient itself and for the physician, because when it first came out in 2013, it was really, really hard to read all these data. But that's a good advantage for having an RNS, as well as being a neuromodulator and helping with your seizures.
Yeah, we love responsive neurostimulators in the people who are chosen correctly. And as
Yes.
you said, that I've had patients implanted in 2015.
Yes.
That's 5 years ago. Every seizure they've ever had since 2015 is in the cloud, and I just log in. I can see how they're doing, and if they had a seizure the night before. Every seizure gets logged for years and years and years, and we determine which seizures are aborted by the electrical therapy, which seizures get through. We make adjustments, and every seizure is stored, and every seizure can be looked at. And so when a person comes in 6 months later, we don't just ask them, hey, how have your seizures been? We know better than they do, because sometimes they've had a couple of seizures in their sleep they don't know about, but they're in the cloud, and we actually can count them.
And I'll just add to that, one of the more interesting things that, we've been doing and other people have been doing as well with the responsive neurostimulation is that when we have very objective data as to how often you're having your seizures and how long they're lasting, if we need to trial new medications, we can do that very quickly and go from medication to determine which ones are working, because we can, like Dr. Ritaccio said, we can start you on a medication, log on 2 weeks later, and compare you to the 2 weeks before very objectively and say, is this going along the right way or is it not? So it helps with medication titration down the road, as well as selecting the proper drug.
Thank you. Our next question is from Cass. You can unmute yourself, Cass.
Hello. My question goes back to what Jillian was talking about or what they were just talking about, the RNS or the surgery. I had that EEG and they told me where my seizures are coming from, but I guess I know it'll be different for every individual. But what are the major side effects from it? I guess I'm scared that if I do the surgery, I'll wake up and not know who my husband is or something.
What kind of surgery we're referring to? If you want to know the benefit risk ratio of which type of procedure?
The brain stimulator.
Oh, the brain stimulator. Oh, okay. You want to try that, Sanjeet, or?
Sure. Yeah. So there's two separate risks we talk about when we talk about neuromodulation or deep brain stimulation. One is the risk of surgery itself. We've done thousands of these surgeries for Parkinson's and tremor, and it's a relatively safe surgery. There's always a small risk of bleeding or infection when we operate, but as far as surgeries go, it's one of the safer surgeries we do. Then there's the side effects of the stimulation itself. And that's where, you know, some of those questions come up as to mood changes or cognitive changes. The thing with stimulation is that anything we do is modifiable and reversible. So let's say you're getting stimulated and you feel like, you know, my memory's not quite what it used to be. You come back and you tell Dr. Ritaccio or myself that, and we can adjust the stimulation to try to continue to have seizure benefit while not having those side effects. And that's one of the benefits of these neuromodulations versus resections, is that we're not taking anything out and we're not making a permanent change to your brain. So anything we do, we can modify it appropriately for the most part.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, well said. I mean, I agree. There, you know, there's other than the procedure itself, once the device is in, as Dr. Grewal eloquently said, you know, anything you don't like can be undone, or tuned, or changed, or refined. So to be honest with you, there's only one downside to devices. That it's the same downside to epilepsy surgery. It's the same downside to epilepsy drugs. The downside is you tried it and it just didn't give you a bang for your buck. You know, I mean, that's the downside. You know, you wanted it to help. You wanted it to help as advertised, and you didn't get the benefit you deserved. That's the downside. And of course, that defines the problems in treating this very multifaceted problem of epilepsy, right? That people try drugs and 6 people do well and 4 people don't. People have surgeries. You know, we love curing epilepsy with a surgery. You know, Dr. Grewal does an elegant resection, as long as I tell him where to go. And then a person's seizure-free forever. That's wonderful. But even, you know, our slam dunk cases, Dr. Grewal will tell you, the national average is maybe 6 or 7 people out of 10 are cured. So we're just constantly trying to get better. But the real downside to all of these therapies really is that, you know, you don't get the control or cure you deserve, because none of these therapies is perfect and none of them work in everybody. So that was my first lesson to you, and that's my final lesson to you. You know, keep trying, don't get stuck. If your doctor is out of ideas, you know, move on. You know, if you don't like what your doctor is saying, you know, move on. Change, try something new. Don't get stuck in a therapy that doesn't work. Move on.
Thank you all for answering these questions and taking the time. Also, thank you to all those that are sharing or asking something. It really helps me connect, especially to Tina, because we're trying to have kids and it's nice to hear someone does. Again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have another question that was submitted through the chat. This question is from Emmanuel. If you are controlled on older anti-epileptic medications, would you ever consider changing a patient's medication for one that has less side effects?
Well, certainly, I think every epileptologist will have an opinion, perhaps not the same. Great question. There's several answers. Not to be confusing, but there are several answers. The first answer is there are going to be some people who are taking, a drug like Dilantin, which was mentioned, which was brought to the market in the 1930s. Okay, the 1930s. That's how long Dilantin's been around. We know that not everybody, but some people on Dilantin have some potential risks. For some people, it offers some risks for poor dental health. For other people, as they go on in years, we know that it might give them a vitamin D deficiency that leads to bone thinning. So we know that no drug is perfect and every drug has some dark side, right? And so the first answer to the question, is there's a lot of patients, and if they're seizure-free on a drug and it's and the drug was released in 1930, and their last seizure was 30 years ago or 25 years ago, and they're seizure-free, and their vitamin D level is normal, and they don't have bone thinning, then I don't care when your drug was released, 1930, 1950. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. On the other hand, the alternative answer, which is equally correct, is if people come to me on an old drug or a brand new drug, and even if that drug is working for them and it makes them seizure-free, if it's dangerous for them or their health, or they don't like it for whatever reason, I'm going to change it because they're the boss. And it doesn't matter if a drug works. It has to work, it has to be safe, and you have to like it, because the average marriage between a patient and a drug is certainly greater than the average duration of a conventional marriage in the United States, right? I think it's 5 years is the average length of a common marriage until divorce. So people get married to seizure drugs for a lifespan. I have patients who are 53 and they've been taking seizure medicines since they're 3, for half a century. If it works, if there are no major side effects, I don't care if it's old or new. If you want to keep it, you keep it. If it works, but and you're a woman and you think it's increasing your facial hair and you want it off, I mean, we'll discuss it. But if you want it off, it comes off. You're the boss.
Like you said, I agree with you. So the question is, sometimes some patients don't have the luxury to go to physicians or who really care and do bone density, check your vitamin D, make sure you don't have any cerebellar atrophy, you don't have any gum problems. They check all the side effect potential, very toxic ones. And if you don't have any of those, yes, why interrupt in something that is stable? I agree. But sometimes also you have to question, do you have any of those side effects clinically? And if not, you have to be also proactive to ask your physician to test you for the potential side effect. Check your liver, check your vitamin D, check your bone. Do a CAT scan if you think you're not walking right, if you're not thinking right, if your coordination is off. So yes, then being on an old medication that's been released in 1800, which was no medication beside alcohol that was released in 1800. If you're in an old medication, that is fine, because I had patients in those situations when they tried to change it, they had breakthrough seizures. But again, maybe sometimes they should have an EEG and take them, maybe taper the medication, maybe they don't need it anymore. So there is a lot of option. It just has to be thoroughly explored before you make that decision. But to just be impulsive and switch without checking what's right and what's wrong and doing a thorough workout, I think it's not smart. So changing a medication, you'd have to do a little bit of due diligence before.
Great, thank you. And guys, we have time for just one more question. This is also coming from the chat. This is from G. Reed, and they're asking if you can recommend a night monitor for nighttime seizures.
Well, I'm gonna let Dr. Grewal answer that, maybe Dr. Ritaccio, but I will touch base on something. There are some little devices and there are more modified devices. So there is a device that is like a watch, but the problem is sometimes the movement could be sleep disorder and it's recording a bunch of information that could create a sort of panic in the family as well. if there was a form of an EEG monitoring with video, maybe it will be more helpful, but we cannot have a patient be recorded all the time on a machine and hooked to electrodes. So that's why the patient who have an RNS, sometimes we could answer these questions. So I'll defer to Dr. Ritaccio for his opinion about.
Well, I don't want to, again, I don't want to necessarily endorse any one product.
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of products on the market. I just want to emphasize here for people that don't know that much about these monitors. We all have viewpoints, and of course, because my name is an avowal, I have an opinion. They're not that special. They can be important, though. They can be important. As Doctor just said, I mean, none of these devices knows when you're having a seizure. What these devices have gotten clever at is something that you wear on your wrist, for example, and it analyzes your movements. Because my general movements of gesture, which is typical of an Italian-American male, making a point, is a lot different than the rigid, repetitive movements of a convulsion. And there are devices that can actually analyze the rate of motion, the repetition of motion, and decide whether that motion is seizure-like or not, and then be tied to some alarm, or call a parent, or call a spouse. And as any device that's analyzing movements, sometimes you're shaking because you're laughing a lot, and it's going to think you're having a seizure, and then your spouse or parent or loved one will be called, or an alarm will go off for no reason at all. But the majority of these devices, like NeuroWatch would be one example, and there are many. They're sophisticated movement monitors that can somehow. They're certainly not going to catch the typical and most common seizure that human beings get, which is a 72-second motionless staring episode. But that's not the point. The point is, if you're having a fully evolved knockdown, drag out, good old-fashioned, Old Testament variety convulsion in your sleep, then these movement monitors can alert somebody. And different devices have different rules. Some devices, you have to pay for the device. Some devices, you have to pay for the device and a monthly service, just like when you have an alarm in your home and you have to pay. So if the alarm goes off, a dispatcher will call someone, and you have to pay a monthly rate. Some devices, you don't have to pay for the device, you just have to pay the monthly rate. So there's costs involved, there's different cost components, there's different devices. Ultimately, they all work the same way. They're movement monitors. They're fairly good. They're very, as we say, they're very, very sensitive. They won't miss the movements of a convulsion, but they may go off for other non-convulsive movements too and give false alarms. So they all work about the same. No one is better. And then there's extreme variability with insurance companies about handling and sharing the cost of these. So whenever someone of our patients asks about this, my nurses are ready. We have a list of products, and then we try to investigate, and decide how this fits in with insurance and coverages. I think that's the best I can do there.
Great, thank you. Well, everyone, we've reached our time limit for tonight. On behalf of Epilepsy Florida, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. A huge thank you to SK Life Science for your sponsorship, and of course, a huge thank you to Dr. Catani, Dr. Ritaccio, and Dr. Grewal for sharing your expertise and knowledge with us and your time with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Okay, like always, I'm gonna say thank you so much for all my wonderful people who are here, and thank you for sharing your experience, for sharing difficulty of life and wisdom as well. And I'm referring to you, Tina, again, because that was a powerful message, and thank you. Thank you so much for Dr. Ritaccio and Dr. Grewal for your time and your sharing your expertise and caring about our patients. And thank you so much for SK Life for being always very supportive of our mission and being present. And we'll see you again next month.
Great. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Have a great night.